Hi folks, I'm Richard Friedman and welcome to my video cartoon for December 9th, 2025. Here is the first cartoon. Here is Richard's Trump last stand on Ukraine's Donbas region, and Putin watches and eyes shut Donald Trump. So this is really a cartoon. It's more of a thing that goes with the cartoon, some information here, and I thought it'd be appropriate to bring it forth here. Now, what we're facing here, what Ukraine is facing, is a very determined President Vladimir Putin, who has in him historical roots going back to Catherine the Great in the late 18th century, who basically brought the whole Donbas region here, this is the Donbas region here, under Russian control. And later on, back in around the early 1950s, Premier Nikita Khrushchev gave a lot of this land, territory back to Ukraine. And then we have Mikhail Gorbachev, who saw the disintegration of the Soviet Union, which President Putin really rejects and is really abhors the notion of that. He calls that an appeasement that was made by Gorbachev that led to the fall of the Soviet Union. So we have to look at that in that perspective here, and to see not to justify all the killings and attacks and all that, but to kind of like understand what Ukraine and what we're dealing with here in where President Putin's roots are, with again going back to Catherine the Great, who took over from her husband Peter III, and she went ahead and brought Russia to the front of power in Europe. So what happened here is that originally President Trump was very gung-ho, saying, proposing what he said. I recall this. He said, I said to President Putin, how would you like some Tomahawk missiles, being some 10,000 or so Tomahawk missiles being delivered to Ukraine? You know, those long-range missiles that could go penetrate Russia. And President Trump said, oh, he didn't like that when I brought that. He wasn't very receptive to that. So right after that, we saw the change here, where it started shifting, and President Trump never again spoke about Tomahawk missiles and went ahead saying that Ukraine would have to give up land and territory and so forth. And then President Putin now, up to date on President Putin, he's rejected all. President Putin has come out with a statement saying that Ukraine has two choices. They can either withdraw from the land here, this territory here in the Donbas region, which the Ukrainians have fortified very much and been fighting and holding, because this is like the gateway to Kiev. And they also have some land here in Kharkiv, some territory that they have. So this here, which is now in Ukrainian hands, this is what they've already proposed. In addition to this, what they have, that the Russians want, President Putin wants this territory as well. So they're moving out to west, and in this, they're going to take this chunk, and as people argue that it could be a down payment towards the future of what holds in the future, because Secretary of State Marco Rubio has told the Europeans that the Ukrainians first have to make a deal with Russia, a peace deal, or some sort of I guess it's a peace deal, before the U.S. would finalize any security agreement. So they were asking Ukraine to give up this territory now. We've gone from Tomahawk missiles, the threat of Tomahawk missiles, to asking now Ukraine to give up territory for no promises of security at all, really, except from the Europeans and and the Europeans, when it all comes down to it, cannot replace the United States. It could hold. It's a holding pattern with the European. Without the United States there, it's just a holding pattern, you know. And so basically here is that President Putin's ultimatum is Ukraine can either withdraw voluntarily and take a peace, or we're going to defeat them and take over this land, and we're going to take it by force. And this here is the gateway towards the capital of Kiev, which would basically decapitate. This is the capital of Ukraine, and would decapitate the whole government, and that would be the takeover of Ukraine. So what basically here, you could look at it this way, is that President Putin is looking for a down payment on this land, because this is the gateway towards, again, Kiev, and also here, Kharkiv, which used to be the capital a long time ago. It's a very important city here, Kharkiv, and they have a base here too that they have here, right here. So this now is still Ukrainian territory, and it's been fortified, and Ukraine has put a lot of manpower and machinery and all kinds of heavy-duty forces to protect this area, and the Russians have been able to take it. So now that, as I said, they're asking Ukraine to go, just give it up, and Marco Rubio said, now give it up, but give it up without any. First, you make the peace, and then we'll talk about security guarantees. So that's the story there, and that is basically, again, I titled this Richard Trump's Last Stand on Donbas territory after the Alaska summit. So after the Alaska summit, again, President Trump came out strong, started talking about these Tomahawk missiles, and then he said, again, I'm repeating myself, but this is the pattern here. After that telephone conversation with President Putin, we saw, I think, in President Trump, a 180-degree turn here towards putting pressure on Ukraine, and then he said that if they don't make the deal, there's going to be no intelligence or no weapons coming to Ukraine if Ukraine does not make the deal, and threaten them in that respect. And all that, of course, motivated President Putin to do what he's doing now, which is, bombing the hell out of a lot of Kiev, and Kharkiv, and other cities, I assume. So this is it here, and this is really the story of Ukraine right here. This is the story of Ukraine. This is the territory that they've taken. This is what the peace proposal gives the Russians, and they want this, and this is still in Ukraine hands as they drew the Ukrainian flag there. And this comes down, Russians come in, take over this, and again, it's the gateway. You could look at it as the gateway towards the Kiev, taking over Ukraine. You could look at it that way, and there it was. Okay, now the second part of this cartoon is, here we have Putin watches an eyes shut Trump from the meeting, from the cabinet meeting that they had here, and here is President Trump at that cabinet meeting with you could see his eyelids there. It was very clear that his eyelids were covering his eyes. The White House says he wasn't sleeping, but his eyes were shut. So nobody could dispute that his eyes were shut. So I'm introducing this as an eyes shut Trump, because again, the White House insisted on President Trump was not sleeping here. His eyes were shut though, and there goes Marco Rubio, and there is Pete Hegseth, giving a thumbs up here. There he is, giving thumbs up. And that was at a cabinet meeting here. President Trump, and President Trump flanked by Secretary of Defense here, Pete Hegseth, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Okay, now here again, before I get to that, I want to read you the background of this to give you a perspective here. So this cartoon given, Steve Witkoff, President Donald Trump's special envoy, has spoken of his developing, quote, this is his own words, this is Witkoff's own words, friendship and relationship with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Okay, so he's spoken of that, Steve Witkoff, his budding relationship. And Trump has stated he looks forward to meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and Russian President Vladimir Putin to finalize a peace deal, but only when the deal is final or in its final stages. So metaphorically here, President Trump closing his eyes here is really metaphorically what he's doing here, because he doesn't want to get involved at this point in any negotiations whatsoever. He wants Witkoff and the other Witkoff is his big man there, and the other junior envoys to handle the negotiations. And they're the ones who came up with this 28-point, along with the Russian envoy, this 28-point peace proposal, which was viewed as a gift to President Putin for a dream gift, a Christmas present now to President Putin, with being Ukraine here. So that's how it was viewed, and they tried to negotiate on the territory, and President Putin was adamantly strong about that. No go, he said. The territory, there can be no negotiations on the territories that he wants, you see? And I said that already, okay? But only when the deal is final. Basically saying he will not be personally involved in war negotiations until Witkoff and others conclude an agreement, okay? And that's that. So President Trump is going to hang out away from any negotiations there. And reportedly, Secretary of State Marco Rubio told European allies that the U.S. wants a peace deal before it agrees to any security guarantees for Ukraine. So Ukraine has to sign the deal without any U.S. guarantees. You know, that's like buying a car, and the dealer says, okay, we'll talk about the warranty after you sign for the car and you get your financing, then we'll talk about the warranties. Buying a car like that. Would you buy a car like that where you got no warranties until after you make the deal, then the dealer will talk about the warranties you're going to get on the car? Hell no. So that's what Marco Rubio proposed to the Europeans here, that he wants, okay? And Putin, in the latest, has warned again that Russia will take the Donbas eastern region. That's over here. This Donbas region here, right here, where the Ukrainian flag is. He will take it by force, or Ukraine's troops will withdraw, rejecting thus any compromise to ending the Ukraine war in terms of territory. That coming after President Trump's negotiators said they believed Russia's leader, and after all this, the President Trump's negotiators, meaning Witkoff and so forth, and the underlying envoys there, have stated that Russia's leader, President Putin, would like to end the war. He'd like to end the war, of course. He'd like to end the war with Ukraine in his back pocket. You know, that's what it comes down to. And that was after the Moscow talks. Okay, so that was that. So I've given you the foundation for this cartoon I'm going to present to you right now here. This is the cartoon here, and there it is at the cabinet meeting with President Trump's eyes closed. The lids you can see here, clear. I drew him just as I saw him. I didn't make this up. I just drew him to the best of my ability as I saw him there, with Marco Rubio reaching out his hand there. And here's how it went. Okay, here goes President Trump. This war started and never would have happened. This is Marco Rubio here. President Trump isn't saying anything here because his eyes are shut, and he's having his own thoughts, or he's a little dreaming there a little bit, or whatever. But President Trump doesn't say anything here. This is all Marco Rubio saying to President Trump And in the middle of that, President Trump's eyes are closed as Marco Rubio is speaking to him. Okay? And here goes Marco Rubio. This war started and never would have happened if you had been president. But this war is going on, and the president is the only leader in the world who can help end it. Okay, this is an extract from lots of the stuff. Marco Rubio basically praised Donald Trump for his diplomacy and for what he's done in foreign affairs, and how President Trump really cares about America, and every decision that President Trump makes in foreign affairs or any other decision is on behalf of America, and he's only thinking of America first and what's good for America. And Marco Rubio was very strong in his convictions about that, and said that those are other things he said. But I focused on this because I thought it was most relevant to the cartoon here. Okay, and there is President Vladimir Putin with the flag of the Russian Federation, and there is the former Russian leader Stalin, Joseph Stalin, who led the Soviet Union, who led Russia before it became the Soviet Union. After World War II, they took a lot of territory, became the Soviet. And here he is, thumbs up, and this was the communist flag of Russia before it became a federation. And there is Joseph Stalin. Stalin means man of steel. Stalin's steel, and there he's up there, and here's President Putin, another man who Putin greatly admires. Joseph Stalin for his strength in fighting off the Nazis during World War II. You know, they almost took Moscow, and they fought them back to Berlin, and it was a remarkable thing there, you know. And Stalin hung out there. He didn't leave. He didn't evacuate Moscow. He stayed there. He stayed right there and encouraged the people and said, "We're going to fight this," and pointed at General, I think, Zhukov, and we're going to do the best you can and fight. And you could argue that was the turning point of World War II, that Stalin led there, the turning point, the first defeat that the Nazis have ever had. Okay, now here goes President Putin here, and he's saying to Comrade Stalin, with President Trump's Russian special envoy being our great friend, Steve Witkoff, because Steve Witkoff, in his own words, you heard, said he has a great budding, friendly relationship with President Putin. It's budding and it's wonderful and this and that, you know. And a great friend, Steve Witkoff, here in Moscow soon, because he was coming to Moscow right after this, because President Trump, after this here, after he talked about his great success with stopping, with a ceasefire in Gaza, with Hamas and the Israelis, and everything that was going on there, he said, now we're going to focus. Steve Witkoff is going to focus on Ukraine. Shortly after, I believe, he went to Moscow, and there that was. Okay, soon. Trump is, and then the punchline here goes to President Vladimir Putin of Russia, gets the punchline, and he says, Trump is the only leader who can help us end this war in his sleep. So Trump has said in his own words that he's not going to get involved in negotiations, and he's going to leave it up to Witkoff, and I guess to some extent maybe even Marco Rubio a little bit there, and he's going to stay out of it until it's finalized. He doesn't want any input to give any input into that. So there you have it, and as symbolic here, here he is with his eyes closed, eyes shut, as a symbolic to that statement that I wrote. President Putin didn't say that, but I wrote that in, symbolic to President Trump here with his eyes shut. He's closing his eyes to the negotiations, and he's letting everybody else take care of it until it's finalized. He's closing his eyes to negotiation, which is what this is symbolic of here. And there it was. Okay, there with President Trump. All right, folks. Thank you for watching my video. God bless you. Hang in there, and I'll see you next time. Bye.